You're listening to Searching for More, a podcast of the Diocese of Arlington. On this episode, Dr. John Cuddeback, professor of philosophy at Christendom College, discusses the role of a man in the household in an age of toxic masculinity.
Because, of course, our society is in open rebellion against the gift of what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman.
Here, Dr. Cuddeback offered greater insight into how a man and a woman can best thrive and serve in family life in the household. This episode's host is Billy Atwell, Chief Communications Officer of the Diocese.
Dr. Cuddeback, thank you for joining me on the podcast.
It's great to be with you.
So you've got an interesting career here in that you're a professor of philosophy. I have an undergraduate in philosophy, so that's always dear to my heart.
Nice.
And I always say, despite the fact that the reputation or the stigma is that if you get a degree in philosophy, you never work in your life, I have found philosophy to help me more in my work in communications than anything I studied in college otherwise. You know, the communications courses, political science, right. It was good. I'm glad I did it, but I feel like the philosophy and how to structure an argument and kind of lay out thoughts rationally, that's helped a lot. It's even helped in marriage at times. It's also gotten me in trouble too. But
I can imagine.
So you've covered a lot of different topics on virtue, fatherhood, friendship, and the household. These are all, while philosophy may feel distant for a lot of people, these are topics that are very at home to a lot of people, that everyone is dealing with. How did you get into, so you're a professor of philosophy, you got a PhD obviously, how did you get into this work? Because this isn't like kind of what people typically think of in terms of philosophical study.
Yeah. Well, I mean, philosophy, as you know, has a very broad range that it deals with. And one of the great areas is ethics, right?
Yes.
It's the study, it's the science of the good life. And I have to say, from the start, that was a particular area of my interest. So when I was still a student, well, in a sense, always still a student,
right.
I really focused my studies on that and writing on that. And then when it came time for me to be a teacher, it was where my heart naturally went. And I'd say my experience with undergrads it's what especially speaks to their hearts, and it does change lives. And so I don't in any way mean to undervalue the other parts of philosophy, with certain higher truths we call more speculative truths
right.
that we just kind of gaze upon and contemplate. Metaphysics, fabulously important science, just for knowing great truths of themselves, and then also as a basis for understanding everything else. But there's that ethics. There's that, what are the different aspects of how you live a truly human life? That's what the students really came alive to, and they're always really surprised. Wow, philosophy does speak so much to where I am.
And it's a huge counterbalance to what we're hearing in culture and society, because ethics is basically whatever we want it to be. It's the worst form of relativism is kind of what we're seeing in culture. So I'd imagine it's refreshing for your students to have a grasp on, good, well-based, well-founded reasons for the ethics and the morality that they believe. Obviously, you're at a Catholic university, so there's that underpinning there. But I'm assuming that's very gratifying for them.
Indeed, and it was somewhat that way for me too. And different people, everyone's story is different, and the way that you come at the kind of fullness of truth. But kind of already beginning as a serious Catholic and having a sense of, all right, here's the moral code. One of the things that was so super exciting for me in studying philosophy was, oh my goodness, Aristotle and Plato are saying things that sounds like they're Christian.
Yeah.
Right? And particularly about the good life. And at first it's kind of a category buster of wow. So it's not just because I'm a Catholic that certain things are really important to me. This is actually something you realize that God has written into human nature. Yeah. And here's the proof of it. So that is uniquely exciting. It deepens your own understanding. And as St. Thomas Aquinas liked to point out, it also is a great basis for speaking with others.
Yeah.
To be able to go to others that do not have the gift of faith, where you can't really appeal to the authority of the church, say, that you are able to appeal to a light that is shining in them, even if they're not quite seeing that. It's a great way there for apologetic purposes.
Yeah, because God and obviously his influence on the world existed before Christ, right? I mean, we always think kind of that was the beginning. What's the beginning of the New Testament? But we have this philosophical tradition that occurs. I don't know if naturally is the word for it, but it emanates from us naturally. So again, you've covered these topics, and Christendom and that whole region is in the Catholic community is extremely family focused. So it's great that this most recent work of yours, Man of the Household, this course that we're going to talk a little bit more has come about. I have to ask though. So when I went to your blog, it's life-craft.org. It said it was formerly Bacon from Acorns. What is that? I don't know that reference.
When I first started a blog, what was it? 6 years or so ago, I was, you look for kind of a catchy title that people are going to remember, and I raise pigs.
Okay.
And so,
okay.
part of how I raised them is when I started raising them. I'd done it when I was young, but I got back into it as a way of having a good work in the household, and we can kind of circle back to that. That's part of the reason that these kind of things are always on my heart. I started keeping pigs because I thought it would be an especially good way for me to be doing something to get rich and fruitful together with the family. Mm-hmm. So I looked into traditional ways of raising pigs, and even around here, one of the big things that was traditionally done is to fatten them on the acorns from the trees in the forest, and it just so happens, it turns out that it's actually better for you. It's more nutritious meat, and lo and behold, it's unbelievably delicious.
Interesting.
And so bacon from acorns, the thing that I say about it is it's just another sign of God's amazing, smiling generosity. And honestly, this is always a theme in my work. If we're willing to look and see how God has designed things naturally, things are always going to turn out being better than we thought they were, or if we tried to impose our own ideas rather than to discover the gift. And there it was in this very simple, hey, pigs want to go out in the woods and eat those acorns, and then it turns out it's better on more levels than you would have realized. This to me is kind of a symbol of human life in this world in general.
Yeah. Wow, that's fascinating. I'm glad I asked that question. That's a great answer.
Thanks for asking. But I changed, and some people say, "Oh, how that was so memorable." Lifecraft. It's not. It sounds too much like other things. But I wanted my name to say a little bit more what I'm trying to do. Yeah. And this is very much goes to the man of the household thing. We need to be crafting a good life together, and that's really what ethics is about. So it really is a way of saying this is ethics is the project, the various aspects of how do we craft a good life for ourselves and for others. That's my passion.
So when we think about who we are as men, I'm a husband and father of 3, so I think a lot about what is my role in the household, but there's also this societal debate over what a man is. Gender ideology is largely debated, and then also the idea of toxic masculinity, that some of what makes us men is actually negative for society. When we look to the church, where do we see the role of the man being explained within divine revelation? So God's revealing this to us, kind of like you were mentioning with the pigs. He gives us everything we need, and he's been giving us what we need. So where do we find what we know to be true about what a man is and what our role is from divine revelation?
Yeah, well, and here's the thing. Your very question points to the fact that, if I may just step back to, as we were talking about earlier, there's the natural, to use St. Thomas Aquinas' language, there's the natural light of reason, and then there's the light of faith of divine revelation. And St. Thomas assures us, and this is really so central to the whole Catholic worldview, is that these two lights never conflict with one another. They're always complementary to one another. And so God intends that we be able to discover certain things through the light of natural reason. And then there's certain things that he reveals, interestingly, both some things that you could have discovered by natural reason, but perhaps haven't or wouldn't have, and so he makes sure we do. And then there's other things he reveals that we wouldn't have been able to. Well, the basic structure of the gift of family life, of what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman, obviously is right at the center of the kind of the natural gift. And then also, it is so emphasized right from the beginning, of course, in Genesis. And so the great work of St. John Paul II, right, in his Wednesday audiences, man and woman, there's so much that you see there that he draws out in understanding of Genesis. And of course, there's so many other passages, the famous one in Ephesians of St. Paul, that can be very controversial, and I think primarily because often misunderstood, of the relationship between the husband and the wife. So it's in the Old Testament, it's in the New Testament, and it's in the great philosophical tradition. And so that particularly has been my interest, to look especially to the great philosophical tradition and just the tradition of how this has been lived, by families transculturally through the, millennia. And so there's if we look honestly, with humility, we discover it's very challenging. It's very challenging, but it's there to be discovered, and then we need to step up and kind of rediscover that, because of course our society is in open rebellion against the gift of what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's kind of like open rebellion, and there is confusion about it. Where do you think men are going wrong? Like, so when you kind of just observe, before you kind of assess the situation, obviously you're trying to address something that is a problem in society. So when you look out there, where are men going wrong more often than not in terms of either understanding or carrying out their role in a household?
Well, of course, it can go wrong in different ways, but I'll put it this way. I'm going to give men the benefit of the doubt. Now, again, there's always some where you could just say, and we can come back to this because this is part of the problem of toxic masculinity, the phenomenon of what's perceived as toxic masculinity. So maybe we should just note that. Any human person can be selfish and indeed wicked, right? And then when men are selfish or even wicked, it's going to be a particular perversion, again, of the gift of what their role could have and should have been. And so, where are men going wrong? In many ways, I'll say we're failing to step up. We're failing to be willing to serve. We're failing to be willing to be humble. We're failing to be willing to be chaste and self-disciplined. So, there's certainly kind of that whole moral aspect. We have to remember that we men often fail in that way. One thing I say to students is, if men act like there's not an intrinsic and beautiful connection between sexuality and children, if men don't act that way, beginning by being very self-disciplined, right, in this whole realm, then how could we expect that women are not going to have, are going to see that connection? How can we expect that women will see that connection? Sometimes I say this in the context of talking about abortion, right? If this is a bit complicated, but if men by their promiscuity are basically saying, I can do whatever I want to, and suffer no consequences. Because is that not really what a promiscuous man does?
Right.
He says, I can do whatever I want and have no consequences. Are we surprised that a woman would be deeply offended at saying, so I have to suffer the consequences of what, in many ways, was your promiscuity? So I'm just, these are the failures of men morally we have to recognize. But let's set that on the side for just a moment and go a different direction. I'm coming upon a lot of young husbands and fathers who really badly want to be a man according to what they have confidence that nature and God is calling them to be. But it's they don't know where to go. They don't know where to turn. They don't have the examples. We don't really have the concepts. We don't have the terminology for this. We don't have a communal tradition that forms young men to have them be ready to say, okay, and if you're entering the vocation of marriage, this is how you think about it. Here's how you approach this. So when we say, where are men going wrong? They, in many ways, they're just unformed. They haven't been shown, they haven't been told, they don't have the peer support. Throw in with that there is now this narrative in culture that if you in any way try to step forward and think in terms of your being some type of leader in this relationship, then you are doing something offensive.
Right.
And this is what's so hard, Billy, for men. If a man is especially inspired by the love of this woman, let's say his wife, they're already married, he has this natural sense of, I want what I do to be good for you, for her. And if the message is being given to him that if you in some way try to step forward, step up, think in terms of leadership, that you actually are offending women, not just women, but woman, your wife, you're failing her, then he's put in this very difficult situation of well, okay, then I guess I need to find some other way. So I think that is one of the kind of the pinpoint that particularly interests me is the men who really, at least in theory, are ready and willing to discover the gift of nature, to figure how can I be that husband and father that I know I want to be, but they don't know where to turn. They don't know how to think about it, and the patterns of our culture's thinking about it undermines their ability to see the truth.
Yeah. Yeah. Are there core qualities that you think kind of define masculinity? So we hear toxic masculinity, it's a perversion of a good. Are there core traits that you think thread from one man to the next? Because the men are going to be different. There is going to be some kind of gradation there. But what are some of the core qualities or essences?
Great question. And I'm going to just take one step before to just give this principle. The beauty that we discover is the distinction between man and woman is one of complementary difference. Right? So from the start, that we have the sense of there is a design. The great philosophers might simply say design in nature. As a Catholic, we can say it's a gift from God. There are these real differences, both fully human, obviously, but the difference, I'd say, a good way to understand it is each tends to kind of specialize, naturally inclined to excel in complementary areas of human goodness, of human life, of human perfection. Very important to remember here, then, is this is actually a unique way that God has designed it, that we have to come together, how we have to work together as a community in these relationships to achieve kind of the fullness of human flourishing in the image of God that God intended. Men need to do what nature and God call them to do. Women do what nature and God are calling them to do. And it's a way of patterning those things and teaching them actually to the other. And so it's not as though when we say man tends to have a strength in X or Y, it's as though, okay, and so that's always simply his thing, and a woman is just doing something different. It's subtle. I say, yes, there'll always be a difference in role. And just reality experience plays this out. Look at the happy marriage where the man is always acting as the man and the woman is always acting as the woman. So real difference, but they're both constantly learning from one another so much that it's what each is excelling in is bringing it out in the other also. Mm-hmm. So having kind of laid that, I think it's always important then, okay, when we start to say, well, men tends to X. It's not as though that's going to imply, oh, women don't do this, women can't do this, women in no way should do this. No, but it's more just kind of the gift of, well, it's just pretty obviously there. So philosophically, one way it's been put is men are more active and initiating, whereas women tend to be more receptive. And I think that's a very good foundation for which then you start to build and say, how does that play itself out, especially in their relationship with one another?
Yeah.
Because that's where it's particularly going to come out. We're going to see it's going to so much be the gift that it is when they are doing this with and for one another.
Mm-hmm. Very good, very good. So if a man is in the position you were talking about a minute ago, where let's assume he's married and he realizes he hasn't really been the man of the household. He hasn't been living up to his responsibilities or acting in the way that his wife would find fulfilling. What is the first step? Like, where does he start in that journey?
Right. You know what? I'm going to use the term I like to use. That he recognized that's the gift of nature, that he take first responsibility in the marriage, in this little community that exists. As soon as you're married, you now are part of something larger than yourself. That's why I really like to emphasize the term household, because where there's a marriage, there's a household. Because by a husband and wife giving themselves completely to one another and committing to be faithful permanently, they thereby have, this is the grounding for something that is bigger than themselves. So immediately a man and woman recognize in this unfolding this astounding natural plan, wow, our love for one another drew us into something much bigger than ourselves. So right off the bat, then he's thinking in terms of, wow, here's this household. Well, men naturally should be able to see when we look in our heart that go back to the kind of active and initiating. I like to reflect and invite men to reflect on when they were boys. Again, there's always some difference, but I think you really can see this pattern of we have the sense of there's something we want to do. There's something we want to make. There's something, I like to throw in the verb, there's something that we want to craft. And kind of all that boy energy that we have, and whether we're building the cities there, or whether it's the Legos, or whatever it is, we have a sense that we want to do something, kind of go out in the external form and kind of make something happen for the world. Right? And pardon me. So his kind of activity, the kind of initiative that tends to well up inside of a man. It's going somewhere. It's not for no purpose. The place to most see what it's for is in the household. And so a man naturally starts to discover, oh my goodness, I've got this energy. I kind of have this sense of initiative. I have this sense of I want to get something done, especially so that I can do that with and for my wife. So what am I first kind of recommending? Think in terms of you need to step forward and take first responsibility for this project. My analogy for that is, think of proposing. I think this is something that we all have a deep natural sense of. Men need to lead. Now this is a key moment, because sometimes someone, in all earnestness, will say, "Why? Why should a man lead?" And this is where I will answer in all earnestness. Great question, but I'm going to ask you a question. Why does a tree grow? Why does a tree grow? It's part of the gift of the nature of being a tree. And when men look inside ourselves, we discover part of the gift of being a man is a call to lead. And we see it in so many different aspects of that kind of energy that we have, that sense of we need to kind of get something done. And look how this plays itself out. Don't we all naturally even still tend to have a sense of a man asks a woman, will you marry me? That's leading. That's stepping forward and saying, I have an idea of something that I want to do, but I don't want to do it by myself. I want to do it with you. And I'm here to tell you first, I love you. A man never asks a woman, do you love me? He tells her that he loves her. And then he says, I love you. Will you join me in this? And a woman theoretically has every right to say, in what? Right? And this is where a man needs to have an answer. Well, no, I mean, totally. No, exactly. That's the thing, because it's a completely equal thing. But you see that that aspect of he needs to know what he's about. He started something. And that structure that you see in a proposal, that structure carries through the whole reality of their marriage, it should, and of their household. And note the beautiful receptivity, the incredible power, let's talk about that just a moment, the incredible power and beauty of femininity. She of that comes from this term receive, that she is there waiting. She maybe she knows that he's going to ask. She waits. The noble woman knows when to wait. And she waits and she receives, and if she so chooses, she says yes. And her role is right there with the man's role in equality, where she can choose to say, yes, now we are doing this together. But it's a fundamentally receptive thing of something that he initiated. And for the rest of their relationship, a man needs to discover, what does it mean that I am to be fundamentally the initiator of this astounding thing called the household? That's the biggest first thing I think a man needs to recognize.
That's a beautiful thing. And when you explain it in the context of, why does a man propose, like, that's kind of a natural thing. Like, we don't think of, that's not an offensive thought. You know what I mean?
I agree.
Like, an old man gets down on her knee and she thinks, who do you think you are? No one says that.
Or, honestly, Billy, you might want to say almost no one.
Yeah, right.
because honestly,
I know the world's getting kind of wild.
And it is, and that shows something, right? And as things deteriorate, it think of the tragedy of the loss of the gift, of whether it's the men who have been made to feel that they shouldn't be the one to propose, or the women who have been made to feel, no, you don't have to wait, or it's not right to wait, or why is he going first?
Right.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, no, but it's a great point,
who are
because
thinking that.
Someone that's listening is recognizing that point as well. Yeah, and there's something very healthy about the anxiety of proposing, whether it's proposing an idea, honey, here's something I think we might want to think about doing, or proposing that we get married in the first place. But there's something healthy about that anxiety, but then the dignity that she receives in it being proposed to her, that he's asking, will you join me in this? And then she gets to say yes, or influence what the yes is about. Like, what is it that we're venturing into? Exactly. And every man needs that. Exactly. I remember I knew a Protestant writer. He wrote like Christian, I wouldn't say it was Protestant theology necessarily, but it was close. And he said, when I mentioned that I was getting married, he said, marriage is the best thing that can happen to a man. And I've thought about that, and that was a passing thought in an elevator that he gave me. Yeah. But I've thought about that so many times since then, because I think because it just became so real over time what that means and how important a wife is for a man. So to be the man of the household means you have to intimately understand the relationship you have with each other and what that role should be. Yes. And how beautiful her role is, and the dignity that dignity of asking her and her being able to say yes. The stress is more on you, right? The anxiety is on you, and that's the way it kind of should be. G.K. Chesterton talks about that a little bit as well. But
can I just really emphasize that I love your point there. The household is the most natural context where everything you are as a man is drawn out. It's challenged and called into its fullness. Mm-hmm. And as so many of us experience, it can be almost to the breaking point. Yeah. But the great drama of being human, the great drama of being a man, and that the household. Can we not smile and say that it clearly is designed to forge you in to what God wants you to be, what your nature is calling you to be. And sometimes it seems a bridge too far. Thank God we have the grace of the sacrament. But very quick side note, Billy, in complete appreciation of what that minister said. Just a side note of marriage, the best thing that can happen to a man. Great point. If a man enters the religious life, if the man becomes a priest, of course, right? And I know in no way you intend, but I just want to take the opportunity to say the same structure, the same 100%. Fundamental structure of being a husband, spouse, followed by bearing its full flowering and being a father, is what all men are called to. The marriage is the most obvious instantiation of that.
That's
and
true.
By studying it, we can all men can recognize more what we are called to, even if we're not called to marriage.
Right.
But there is to discover also the amazing ways. that there needs to be that kind of leadership, that kind of initiative among our clergy.
Absolutely.
Right? As it were, stepping up and being a protector, a provider, a teacher, as all men need to be.
An initiator. I mean, a pastor in a parish community, I mean, how often does he have to initiate things with anxiety of how is this going to be received? Is this a good idea? I don't even really know until I bring it to people and get feedback. Yeah, one of the blessings of working with so many priests is you do get to see spiritual fatherhood and what that means and how it's lived out, because there is a commonality there that's stronger than I think most married men probably recognize.
Yes.
And even honestly, more often than some priests recognize, like the commonality between the two at times.
Amen.
So you teach an online course. It's called Man of the Household. Talk a little bit about what this course is and some of the key topics that you go through there.
Well, the idea behind it was kind of the inspiration goes back to what I mentioned earlier. In my travels, in my lecturing, in my teaching, to recognize that we men need encouragement, we need formation, beginning with an intellectual formation. Maybe in a different day and age where there was a common practice of how to think about being a husband and father that was passed on from father to son and so forth in the community, that still studying these things always would have been great. But I think particularly in this day and age where so many of us are struggling we have the sense that we're missing something. We have a sense that we're called to more, but we're not exactly sure how to go about doing it. This is the inspiration after years of teaching this to undergrads in a family and household course, just recognizing the material here is so powerful, it's so life-changing, it's so life-giving. What I often have in mind? I have in mind the wives and the mothers who so deserve to have us men be what we're called to be. And so it's a simple course. I make it available at my website for free, and it includes 4 modules that are basically taking you through the fundamental principles that we've begun to talk about here of what it means, first of all, just to be a man at all. How's that play out then in the household? Look at the 2 fundamental relationships there, a module on man as husband, and a module on man as father. And then finally, looking at the other concrete ways in day-to-day life this manhood is lived in the household, and look at important topics like work and leisure in the home, and how for a man to think concretely and specifically about taking his leadership role and together with his wife, crafting a household that can be this place for flourishing. It's about relationships. It always begins in the spousal relationship and it goes then to the children. So the other aspect is I have worksheets that are for self-reflection and then making resolutions, and then choosing certain action steps. Because at the end of the day, we all know, we're so busy, we've got so many things going on, you can study this stuff and kind of say, okay, that's great. Yeah. What I would really like to emphasize is we men need to have a plan. It's actually a very masculine thing. There's an aspect of masculinity is we're very intellectually rooted. And I like to say to men, I don't care how you did in school. I mean, to be rational intellectual is not the same thing as to be academic. You have to be intellectual to be a husband and father. You don't have to be an academic, but you have to be willing to think through, especially in this day and age, for everybody's good. You need to be able to think through and have a plan, make a plan together with your wife of how we're going to live out our relationship first, and then make this household be what it can and should be. So the specific concrete goal is at the end that you have a number of action steps rooted in the principles that then you are going to start to practice each day with just a kind of a quick weekly examination of conscience. How you doing on it?
So it's a self-guided thing, right?
It's
video-based, and you have work resources.
Exactly. Yeah. It's all pre-recorded, and so you can do it completely on your own, viewing the videos. You download the documents. Though I do have what I call online office hours. Because very often the men want to have, when I first did this, I did it in a live online classroom where then we could have question and answer. There's something great about that. But this, by being prepackaged and being able to, because then everyone has to be there at the same time, right? So I want everyone to be able to have those videos, to go through those modules, but then I have certain times where I'm in the online classroom and you want to come in, you want to have a discussion, you want to ask questions, because this is the type of thing. I really encourage men to do it together. Right now I've got a group in Maryland that is doing this, and they get together, they watch them on their own, they get together and they discuss it. We need to have other men that we're thinking about this with.
One of the modules, the modules that you mentioned, like husband, father, and then work, leisure, and daily life in the home. One of them is man as crafter, and you used that term before. What do you, when you say crafter, what do you mean by that?
Okay, well, I mean, craft is very closely connected in my mind to the word art. In the tradition, in art is a know-how, where there's specific truths about specific steps that need to be taken to achieve specific ends, right? So you can be a craftsman of many different kinds of things. Well, one of the things I love, we talked about ethics, right? Ethics is the most important know-how that there is. That's why it's a part of philosophy, right? Philosophy is always dealing with the higher kinds of knowledge. So ethics is a know-how. So in a sense, when you study ethics, you're trying to get the know-how, the craft of living a good life. And so I like to say it begins with taking responsibility for your own life. We need to craft something, Billy, you and I, in our own life. Am I taking responsibility for my actions? Am I being just? Am I being courageous? Am I being chaste, right? So I need to be crafting a certain lifestyle for myself. But then, lo and behold, especially in a spousal relationship, you realize, I'm not just called to kind of take responsibility for crafting a certain kind of life that I'm living. I need to step forward and craft in the sense of form, guide this whole community. And so it's incredibly daunting. And frankly, I mean, when we see it, I mean, it at times can be lonely. But it's such a beautiful way to serve. Our wife has her challenges. We have ours, but to kind of just step out there and take first responsibility for crafting this amazing thing that we have together. So crafting as kind of a know-how where the man is playing his active initiating role, kind of guiding, directing. The notion of authority is extremely important here, right? To properly understand, authority is always essential to fatherhood. There's no such thing as fatherhood if there's not authority with it, right? And so one in authority, true authority, is always trying to craft, to form the good life of those that are under his authority. So that's what I'm thinking there.
Yeah. You wrote something recently that I wanted to read and then ask you a question based off, because I think it's so good. It gets to this idea of investment, like to truly lead, you have to be willing to just constantly give. I mean, it's a service role more than anything else.
Yes.
And in a blog post, Planting as an Act of Hope, which I think you just did recently here. Even in an annual garden, one day I will likely sow seeds, the fruit of which I will not live to see and to harvest. Surely there is a grace in this. It can focus my attention on an astounding gift, to have the opportunity to labor as an exercise of faith and of hope and of love, even when the fruit is dubious and hidden from sight. A lot of fatherhood, and I think being a husband, but I think especially in fatherhood, there's so much work involved. It's an exhausting endeavor that I think some men get to a point where they start asking, well, what's in this for me? Like I work and serve and serve. When do I get some fruit out of this tree? How do we switch from a mindset like that to one that appreciates the planting alone? You know what I mean? The fruit is a benefit, but we have to be willing to plant and never see fruit. Like the verse of that is, even in an annual garden, eventually I'll plant something I'll never benefit from. That was like it's a reminder of your death, right? I mean, but it's how do we switch that mindset?
Great question. I mean, the first thing I'm going to say is prayer. I mean, because really, Billy, you're going to the heart of things. I mean, are we able? Isn't it the center of the human drama? Are we willing to look to a good that's beyond our own, that's bigger than our own, that actually does include us, that doesn't leave us behind, but it's not fundamentally about me. And in a sense, this is the drama of maturing. Mm-hmm. This is the drama of exactly what a father is trying to draw his children towards. Mm. And so we fathers had better discern how to become unselfish, self-giving lovers. Otherwise, we'll never be able to do exactly what precisely fatherhood is about doing, namely pattern that and draw them to that. So again, great question. We get on our knees. But I'm going to say further, here's the beauty of it. If we're willing to receive the gift, if we're willing to receive the gift that this marriage thing is, even when it seems like it's going to crush you, that this is, again, God's smiling generosity. If we're just faithful to it and we keep trying, it's going to draw out our unselfishness. Goodness sake, you're not going to make it if you don't learn how to be unselfish.
Yeah.
So we got to just keep trying, asking God for the grace. Right? Because at the end of the day, if I may, on that, thinking of sowing seeds, right now my children are starting to leave home. And it's this astounding moment for me of kind of thing like, wait, like for all these last number of years, this has been my life. I don't even want to picture my life without you.
Yeah.
But to be willing to say, you know what? They're about to maybe go and have a husband, a wife, and children, that then they won't be able to picture their life without those people.
Yeah.
And am I going to say, well, hold on a second, what about me?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying the point is I'm going to be left behind, but a father is a lover, who's going to say, you go. Even if to some extent I'm left behind, this wasn't about me in the first place.
Yeah, and there's I think there's an element to this too, which is where all of our joys will be incomplete because we're not in heaven. Like that's where it gets fulfilled. So if you think some other life or some other thing something that you don't have to sacrifice, and if I could go do this more, if you think that's going to make you happy, I kind of hope you get it so you realize that it doesn't, and then you fix that thinking altogether. Right. I'm into the outdoor stuff. I was watching a video of this guy doing like long distance backpacking, and he mentioned that he and his wife decided they weren't going to have kids so that they could travel and backpack and those things. And he said, and it stuck out to me, and I thought of this interview with you that was coming up. He said, isn't life all about being happy and finding happiness? And I was like, no, it's about finding holiness. And I remember my mom taught me that. That's not my genius. That was what my mom said. I don't care if you're happy. I want you to be holy. That was her kind of offhanded joke, which was only partially a joke. But if you think that that those kinds of, whatever it is that you're wishing that you were doing that kids are keeping you from or a spouse is going to make you happier than that spouse and those children, you're missing core things that'll make you happier now, coincidentally. But you're missing the fact that this isn't the end. It's like there's almost like an atheistic assumption in life. It's all about being happy. It's like cram it in while you can, right? It's we only got a day, so eat as much junk food as you can, rather than enjoying a good meal. Right. And so anyway, that's my thought.
If I may, what comes to my mind as you're saying that is one of my favorite lines in Scripture of our Lord in this 4th chapter of the Gospel of St. John, where he says to the Samaritan woman, "If only you knew the gift of God." This backpacker, God has made you to be happy, but you have not yet seen.
Yeah. You
haven't seen the richness of human life, even on the natural level. You haven't seen. You're going to go and backpack forever with your wife. Are you? There's something in the intrinsic dynamism of your love towards your wife that should be, and God grant that they discover it. This is where the whole realm of procreation, of sexual morality is so key. The intrinsic connection between the sexual act and children. This is in a certain way the epicenter of the lie today. Because it's where the naturalness of the gift comes out. When you are really in love, you are drawn towards the sexual act. This is part of the gift. But lo and behold, the sexual act is intrinsically generous and generating.
Yeah.
Right? It calls you all of a sudden to be serving more people, right?
Yeah.
To be giving of yourself. And so that through artificial contraception, spouses or non-spouses just say, well, we can do the sex thing. Forget the inconvenience of the children. If only you knew the gift of God. You're casting off what your own love expressed sexually is speaking to you, is telling you that this love is about a generosity right here.
Yeah.
And our dear backpackers.
Yeah.
They've been lied to.
Yeah.
And they're missing the gift.
Yeah. And you can even see, like, as I've followed his videos for a little while, like the happiness is fading as he's accomplished these trails, these like through hikes, like 9-month-long trails. As he's done one to the other, it's kind of like there's this like, so what's next? Like there's this like wandering, like sadness.
Right. Yes.
That comes with that. It's a wild thing to witness in that way. What role does friendship play in this? Men, I feel like, need friends. And if your friends are just telling you that you're doing it fine, and if they're feeding this self-loathing that we're talking about, you need new friends. Friends can be good to smack you in the head, but also encourage you and motivate you. I mean, you've written a lot about friendship. Is there an intersection here between being the appropriate man of the household and the friends?
Totally. I love it. I mean, in God's loving plan, wisdom, St. Thomas Aquinas and Scripture say is always, it's putting everything in its place. Everything comes together so wonderfully. So friendship plays into marriage, family, and household so centrally. Your question was focusing on, let's do that for a second, on the need for a man to have friends outside the marriage. That we circle back in a second. So the fundamental principles, truths of how a friendship works are a great help. Mm-hmm. of understanding how a husband and a wife can deepen their relationship, right, with one another.
Right.
It's but it's a distinct kind, and we need to see that distinction. But friendship is always a way of helping one another grow in character, which means helping one another grow in virtue, helping one another grow in holiness. And so men, particularly in this very arduous task of becoming a man, again, it's part of the gift. It's part of the plan. Clearly, my wife plays an absolutely irreplaceable role in helping me discover even what it means to be a man. Mm-hmm. By her being a good woman, this helps me understand what it means for me to be a good man, and vice versa. That said, there is an irreplaceable role for other men who are trying to discover the gift and live their vocation as husbands, for me to be able to work together with them. We have a kind of connaturality with one another. We're able to share with one another and encourage one another and support one another in an absolutely unique way. And you were mentioning to me earlier, Billy, how it's particularly where, in this day and age of rush, and we're so busy, a challenge we haven't talked about. It's a big theme for me. So often husbands are away from home so much. This is a uniquely contemporary challenge, that men, by and large, are away from their spouse and their children for so much of the time, right? Mm-hmm. And so then when we finally do get home or we get off of work, we need to really plug in with our spouse and our children, absolutely. And so, gosh, where am I going to find the time for male friendship? Great question. It needs an answer. Right, I mean, today is about prioritizing.
Yeah.
I mean, we really got to look very carefully at our career and what we're doing out there to make sure that we are getting the time we need, obviously, with our wife first.
Right.
With our children. If we're blessed with more than one child, am I cultivating relationships with them individually? This takes time. But then we also need to have that male camaraderie. It's not just so I get a break.
Right.
It's so I can work with them on the very things we're talking about here.
Yeah. Yeah, and what I'm strong in, I can help them with, and what I'm weak in, they're going to hopefully kind of refill a bit.
Exactly. There's nothing like it.
So this course, Man of the Household, who's it really designed for? Is it just for married men? Is it for men who are engaged or wanting to be engaged, or what is it?
I'd put it to you this way. A philosopher might say the proper object, the most direct, the group that's most directly about is married men.
Okay.
I mean, that's where, in a sense, as in giving the lectures, I'm kind of speaking to men in the mode of, this is a married man. That said, I think for that very reason, it's very appropriate for men that are preparing for marriage, because it's simply just a little switch in the mind. It's okay. This is what my manhood now is drawing me towards. This is what I'm going to need to do. How can I be preparing for that now? So I absolutely think it's very appropriate for men thinking in terms of preparing for marriage. And then I'd likewise say, honestly, grandparents, men who were not called to be married, we all are called to be fathers. And the fundamental structure of fatherhood becomes most clear in the context of the household. So I really do think that it helps all men to be able to reflect upon those aspects that are most highlighted, are most obvious in the context of the household. So again, direct object, yes, I'm kind of gearing it towards men who are married, but preparing for marriage, very fitting. And then anyone who wants to think in terms of how to understand the masculine role itself.
Yeah. And I think the idea of doing it in a group setting, if you can, because it's self-guided, it's going to be easier to find time with guys to maybe absorb the video, work through the materials, and then get together and talk about it. I could see that as being a very fulfilling way. And it's a very intentional way to get together. There's something we have to do. If there's not something to do, we're going to push it off to next week maybe or something. But and is life-craft.org the best place to go to get that? And you've got other books and things there too that are great.
And a book on friendship that is coming out and being republished in November by Ignatius Press called True Friendship.
Great.
So that is kind of a nice.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But I depending on when people are listening to this, there might already also be at the site a woman of the household, which is the next the next iteration that I'm working on together with my wife. It's kind of the companion course.
Very good.
So I'm really, really, really excited about
That's
that
exciting.
too.
You're completing the set there, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, Dr. Cuddeback, thank you so much for your time and for your expertise. This was wonderful. I really appreciate everything you've offered to us.
Well, it's been a blessing to be with you. Thanks so much.
You're listening to Searching for More. If you enjoyed this podcast, please write a review on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Also, make sure you follow the Diocese and the Arlington Catholic Herald on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And subscribe to our YouTube channels for regular videos that inspire, educate, and inform about the Catholic faith in our diocesan community.